Hey everyone, just wanted to welcome you to part 2 of our 3-part podcast with Dr. Scriffignano. If you haven't already watched part 1, where we discuss things like factoring the right assumptions and quantifying the veracity of a data source, make sure to check that one out first. In this video, we get into the exciting things happening in large language models, how to responsibly innovate, confounding characteristics of data, truth as it relates to analytics, how to learn from data that changes over time, and addressing challenges with bias in data. As a quick reminder, Dr. Anthony Scriffignano is a world-renowned data scientist with 45 years of experience, over 100 patents and publications, numerous awards and credentials that would make even the smartest person you have ever met develop an inferiority complex. Stay tuned. You will definitely learn something. I want to come back to this question of bias in a little bit, but you were talking about some of the exciting stuff happening in large language models. We didn't get into it in vision models, and maybe that's another conversation. But obviously, these things are bringing about great changes. And so how does one handle these innovations responsibly, and how do you ensure trust in the solutions built on top of them?
So responsibility and trust are at the heart of the discussions around AI ethics right now. For sure, we are not done thinking about this. Responsibility includes things like, are we doing, when you do research in an academic institution, if it involves people, you have to go through an institutional review board, an IRB, to make sure that you're not going to hurt, and people won't be harmed, your subjects won't be harmed. We don't have one of those for the world of data, right? Who benefits from my data? What happens if I'm harmed by your bot? What happens if my large language model libels you or slanders you? The law hasn't caught up to these things yet. Innovation is always going to outpace regulation. So, responsibility comes before all of that. Like, stop and think about the implications of what you're doing, and think also about what the unknown met needs might be that you're satisfying. Like, how are you helping people do something you don't intend for them to do with this thing that you're building? And also, pay attention to how your inventions are being used. Know what your customers are doing with it, especially when it's something very new. And then on the flip side of that is, how can we prove that we didn't do something like, all of these things that we're trying not to do. You can prove that you didn't have racial bias if there's no characteristic of race in the data. But that's kind of naive, because you can still guess at it from other aspects of the data. So auditability, prove that you didn't do something. Very, very big topics right now. Regulators are focusing on this. AI ethicists are all over this, and we're not done. We're not even close to done in terms of figuring it out. But that's not stopping us from moving forward with these things. I'm reminded of, like the invention of dynamite, and is it going to help for mining or bombing? Right? Well, yes. So we got to be really careful.
Do you think that some of the confounding characteristics of text, counting for things like sarcasm and slang and neologisms, impact how the current state of art models are performing?
I do not believe that our models are paying enough attention to those things. They tend to get waved off when you argue with the folks that are doing this sort of work. They say, those are nice corner cases, but they're corner cases. And let me tell you how many millions of articulations I looked at. And I would submit for your consideration, when you read social media, how often is there a little bit of nuance and sarcasm in it? A lot. How often do we use words that we made up because there aren't words for whatever we're talking about? A lot. How often do we borrow words from other languages when we're speaking? A lot. These algorithms aren't really considering that yet. Someone listening to this will probably say, oh, well, we can do large language models in other languages. Yes, you can. But the combinatorial problem that you get into when you start combining all of those articulations, I speak, actually, depending on how you want to define speak, 7 languages, right? So if you looked at my
Sorry, I
email,
missed one.
no, it's because some people would say you don't speak any of those languages, to varying degrees, right? But if you were to look at my email, you would find articulations in at least 4 or 5 different languages. Um, Good luck summarizing that, right? Now, and then you're going to say, well, I'll translate it. Well, when you translate it into what? And depending on where you translate it, you're going to lose nuance and meaning. And those translation algorithms have their own bias. We are not even close to this yet. And this is why even in critical situations, they require 2 interpreters so that one can check up on the other one, because sometimes the way you hear it isn't the way it was intended, or there's another way to interpret it. Even when we're speaking the same language, we can often misunderstand what someone's saying if we impute intent, if we impute emotion. So yeah, if you're going to say that we taught computers to do all of this right now, of course we have. Not even close. Not even close.
Is there such a thing as too much data then? Like, what's your take on how we can avoid garbage in, garbage out?
Well, the theory with a lot of these approaches is the more data you throw at it, the better they get. But there's all kinds of bias. There's sampling bias. Where did you get that data? If you get a whole bunch of data from one type of constituent and less from another, the speech starts to approach that's called the multimodal distribution problem. You can spoof these things. You can teach them to be hateful. You can kind of gang up on them, do like the equivalent of a DDoS attack on the learning model, and like teach it to hate, teach it to do certain things. It's actually not hard. You have to be patient, but it's not hard. So that's certainly possible for adversarial manipulation. Think about disinformation campaigns, trying to get out, either spreading something that is wrong, or just spreading something in a way to make it seem more right. Little nuance there, but you can cause a lot of trouble really fast when you start letting machines do your talking for you. I don't want to date this conversation, but we're just on the cusp of something that was pretty epically big and was fueled in large part by people talking about it on social media. Let's say that happened spontaneously. Well, did the world just learn that it can be made to happen not spontaneously? I don't know. Probably. So yeah, we have to do a much better job of monitoring these things, of building in responsible AI, which is very tricky, because responsible is one of those words that means different things to different people. And unfortunately, you start out on a very long journey, a couple of degrees off where you should be going, and you'll get to a very wrong place. We got to fix this early on, because it'll never get easier.
Along those lines, what's your perspective on truth and how it plays out in analytics, and how do we know what's true, Anthony? You're the right person to answer this question.
I spend a lot of time thinking about this, what we call veracity adjudication. I remember distinctly how I felt the first time it occurred to me how brilliant it is that when we go to court, we swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, because those are 3 different things. And those are 3 different ways of misleading somebody. I can tell you everything I need you to know, and everything I can say can be true, and I just leave out the parts I don't want you to know. That's one way to lie. Another way to lie is to sort of change the perspective on how you'll interpret it. When I was growing up, we used to have these magazines, like science magazines and stuff for kids, and in the back there were all these ads for all these crazy things you could send away for. And one of the things that you could send away for was a submarine, and it told you that it was 6 feet long and it had a periscope, and and if you ordered it, you got this cardboard submarine. It's not wrong, it's just not completely right. Did you really think you were going to get a submarine for $6? But
Cool.
Some kid did, right? So I think that in veracity adjudication, there's some really exciting things that have been done, looking at tone, looking at obviously the way biometric, lie detectors and things like that, that's been around for a long time. But teaching AI to look at articulations, whether I use the first person or the second person. I went to the hotel and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I thought the pool was beautiful, or this hotel is great and they have a wonderful pool. Like, those are two different first person, second person, or third person, depending on people are less likely to lie in the first person, right? So one of the first steps you can do in veracity adjudication is, it doesn't mean you're finding the lies, but you can separate the first person narrative from the non-first person narrative. And then you can do different treatments in the first person narrative than you can do in the non-first person narrative. Another thing that you can do is you can look at the density of new facts in the articulation. So, if I just go on and on and on about the pool and I never say anything else, very different than if I talk about the pool and the front desk and the menu and the restaurant, and the likelihood that I'm making all that stuff up is less likely. So just talking about reviews, but there's lots of ways that you can look at articulations and start to build cues on the likelihood of veracity. It doesn't mean you're going to build the AI equivalent of a lie detector, where you type in give me your social media profile and I'll tell you if you're lying or not before I date you. I don't think we're going to get there. I'm pausing because there are actually ways to do some of that, to see if people are lying, by looking at other places in social media. But there's a long way to go. It's pretty exciting. There's not a lot of folks there's corners of this that are worked on very hard, like, for example, whether or not a review is true. And then there are corners of this that are played with a lot, like trying to figure out whether a campaign, a political speech is sincere or authentic. I don't know. Are we doing this for op-ed pieces and editorials? Probably not, right? Because who would care about the result? I would, but you probably would.
There's at least 5 others.
There's a lot of science behind veracity adjudication, and there's a lot of really cool things that can be done. None of them are easy, and most people don't get too excited about it. I wish they would. Really exciting. I'd like to get to a point where you could say, look at an articulation and get clues about whether or not you need to ask more questions. And I can think of examples of where that could be very helpful in border protection, in courts, in looking at eyewitness testimony. If we get away from the law, I could see where it could be very helpful in academia. I could see where it could be, I don't want to get too far into it, but I could see where it could be very helpful in understanding the authenticity of what you appear to be doing in your research, et cetera. I could see it in the workplace. I can also see it becoming very dystopian. If it's taken too far. You get an email from corporate that says, we've looked at all your emails and, your veracity score is under 0.78, and therefore you have to take the following training. And we can all imagine crazy things like that happening. So let's not take it too far, but I can imagine some really cool things that we could do that aren't happening yet.
How do you account for algorithms needing to learn from data that can change over time? To be more precise, the notion of what makes a piece of information wrong appears arbitrary. When a new piece of information conflicts with what's currently existing in the system, how do you simultaneously ask whether the initial value is wrong and if the new information is correct?
So all true data is not simultaneously true. If I say to you, what's the capital of France?
Paris.
Yeah. Okay, what's the capital of France?
Paris.
And how about the capital of France?
Paris.
Okay.
Paris.
Maybe, it could change, right? But slowly, right? If I say, how do you feel? And you say, fine. And then I say, how do you feel? And you say, fine. Pretty soon you're going to say annoyed, right?
Right.
So, certain types of information has more latency than others. And so if we get away from was it true or not when we ingested it, let's just assume that it was. It was raining, right? That doesn't mean it is raining. So there's a shelf life to certain types of truth. And a lot of algorithms just assume that all the data that they ingest is true. The second part of your question brings up something I call the quixotic observation, the observation that is counter to the conclusions you would have reached with all of your collected prior observations. It's possible that that quixotic observation is some sort of error. I've got 40 pieces of data that say the building is on fire, and I've got this one piece of data that says the building isn't on fire, but fires go out, right? So when you come across the quixotic observation, maybe you trigger additional quality control steps. Maybe you trigger veracity adjudication. Maybe you consider adversarial manipulation. And also, you better consider that your a priori conclusion might need to change. So AI systems that can do what's called recursive methods, where you can learn what you've learned and then continue to update your conclusions based on what you continue to learn, are really powerful and really exciting. Also a lot harder to build. But shelf life of data, veracity of the data, and also the quixotic observation. Those are the big rocks that you have to think about there.
I believe I heard a talk of yours a while ago where you were stressing the point that we do not even realize how much AI is nudging the things we do. So, the music we listen to, what events we go to, what videos we watch on YouTube or wherever. How does the question of bias come into play here? And what are some of the most common sources of bias that we should be aware of?
So I think that's even much more true now than when you probably heard me say it. I used to say, well, I'll never, we all say, I'll never report to a robot. And then Outlook tells you to go to a meeting, or your car says go left, and you do, right? We're already taking direction from AI agents at some level in our daily lives, and more so now. We have recommendation engines. We've all gotten into the situation where you go to look up something quickly on the internet, and you get sucked in. You started out trying to figure out how to spell Zimbabwe, and the next thing you're reading about trees, and it's nothing to do with what you started with, right? Well, how did you get down that rabbit hole? A bunch of algorithms decided to take you there, and those algorithms not only took you there, but they're learning as you stay there or don't stay there. And sometimes they're very sophisticated. You think, well, I'm reading the newspaper. I went on a website and I'm reading the newspaper. How do you know that collection of news that you're seeing is the same as the one the next guy is seeing? And the answer is you don't know that. So different types of bias, there are so many. The one I see probably the most in just turning on the news is what's called confirmation bias. That if you go into a situation with what I just called an a priori conclusion, something that you think is true, you'll tend to see the data that supports the thing you think is true. And you'll feel like it's more true because you saw that data. That doesn't make it more true. So we have to be very careful about letting the data speak rather than just finding the data that supports what we already think is true. Lots of great examples of that with COVID recently, with the situation in the Ukraine, with, I don't want to get into political things, but you have to make up your own mind, but you have to make up your own mind with data. And if you want to do it with emotion, that's fine, but at least be honest with yourself. That's what you're doing. Another one is something that's often called optimism bias, which is sort of overestimating the likelihood of the things you want to happen. We do this a lot when we're kids. We're going to go to the beach, but it's raining. Yeah, but the clouds are going to clear. Yeah, but the car just broke down. Yeah, but the last time that happened, we fixed it really fast. Like, you focus on the things that can still produce the positive outcome that you want. We can do that with data. Another one that is huge is sampling errors. You look at large amounts of data and you say, well, we took a sample of the data and we did this measurement or that measurement or this calculation. How'd you sample the data? Well, randomly. What do you mean randomly? Well, we just took a random sample of the data. Well, how'd you know how much to look at? There was a sample size calculator. Well, that's for a normal distribution. You have a normal distribution? I don't know. What does that mean? Well, you have the same number of small, medium, and large shirts in your inventory? Well, no, of course not. Well, then you can't take a random sample. Right? You have to stop. Is there the same number of green M&Ms as red M&Ms? And probably not. In fact, I'm pretty sure there isn't. They're all different ratios, right? So, you scoop in there and you take your random sample. There's a multimodal effect there that the distribution wasn't normalized to begin with. Sorry, statistics mattered when we took it, right? So sample errors are huge. There's a cousin of that called a convenience sample, which is you just use the data that you happen to have. How did you reach this conclusion? Wow, we looked at 1 million records. Where'd you get them? From the last order. Well, did you look at the second to the last order? Well, no. Well, how do you know they're the same? Well, you're just making this more complicated. No, I'm sorry, math is making it more complicated. Definitely confirmation bias, definitely optimism, definitely convenience sampling, multimodal effects. Those are some big ones that I see all the time. Look at the newspaper. Almost anytime you open the news, you'll see examples of all of these types of bias. It's not even hard. It makes me crazy.
It reminds me of a joke I heard the other day. I was at some stand-up, and it was something along the lines of, I'm no scientist, but I am American and I do my own research.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you for tuning in. The goal of this podcast is not to sell, but for those of you who have been asking about what we do at Soothsayer, in a nutshell, we are a team of data scientists and engineers that help a plethora of forward-thinking companies explain the unknown, predict the future, and optimize their business. We've built bespoke AI solutions to predict everything from duplicate and fraudulent insurance claims to when major utility assets will fail, and from customer demand and revenue to plant process effects on gas emissions. We've optimized things like multinational supply chains, end product chemistries of metals, and finite element modeling simulations. In natural language processing, we've provided deep insight into chemical formulations, inspection reports, and insurance claims. In computer vision, we've detected and classified defects in everything from contact lenses to refrigerators. I should note that we also do a lot of strategy and solutioning work as well. Also things like data science education. So for instance, we've designed several master's and PhD programs. We've easily trained over 6,000 people. Anyway, that's a little bit about us. If you'd like to learn more, please check us out at soothsayeranalytics.com. You can also contact me directly at chris@soothsayeranalytics.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/in/cdol.